Hello and welcome to this history tutorial on the British sector of the Western Front. This is for Edexcel GCSE History Medicine in Britain. Today we will cover transport and terrain. We will examine how the terrain of the Western Front impacted on illness, injuries and treatments available. We will also look at the various types of transport that were utilised on the Western Front. The constant shelling and the type of terrain that soldiers were fighting on left the landscape full of craters and holes and destroyed many roads. This led to major problems in transporting injured men away from the front line. Men who were injured on the Western Front needed to be moved away from the front line in stages as soon as their condition was stable enough. Stretcher bearers would carry away the large numbers of wounded from the front line, both during the day and at night. This meant they were often exposed to shelling and gunfire. When the BEF was first sent to France in August 1914, the military leadership decided not to send any motor ambulances with them. It was soon realised that this was a mistake, as the horse-drawn ambulance wagons could not cope with the large number of casualties. Men who were transported in these wagons were shaken about, which often made their injuries even worse. This lack of transport actually led to soldiers being left to die or being taken prisoner by the Germans. In October 1914, an appeal in the Times newspaper raised enough money to buy 512 ambulance wagons, which would make transporting wounded soldiers much easier. It would also prevent injuries from being made worse on the move. The first motor ambulances were also sent. However, motor vehicles could not operate in much of the muddy terrain on the front line, so horse-drawn wagons continued to be used throughout the war. In worse terrain, 6 horses rather than the usual 2 pulled the ambulance wagons. Wounded men might also be transported by train or by canal in the final stage of their evacuation to the base hospitals on the French and Belgian coast. In the first few months of the war, the RAMC had to use French goods trains. The first ambulance train designed for carrying wounded soldiers arrived in France in November 1914. It had spaces for stretchers fitted down both sides of the carriage. Later, some of the trains sent to France even had operating theatres. The use of trains to move injured soldiers was, however, problematic. Moving patients via the rail network damaged the war effort, as there were too many trains moving patients and not getting supplies where they needed to be. It was for this reason that the RAMC began to use canals. Although the journey was slow, it was comfortable, and some of the wounded bypassed the base hospital to be transferred directly to ships that were transporting wounded men back to Britain. In summary, due to the nature of the terrain, transporting injured soldiers was problematic on the Western Front. When the British first arrived in France, they were reliant on horse-drawn ambulances, but it was clear very early on that this type of transport simply could not cope with the number of casualties, and those transported in this way often had their injuries worsened. Following an appeal by the Times, funds were raised to send 512 motor ambulances to France. These also struggled in the terrain as they found the muddy conditions difficult, which meant horse-drawn ambulances were used throughout the war. Train and canal networks were often used as part of the chain of evacuation, as it was critical to get injured soldiers to treatment as quickly as possible. To get further help, visit history.outwood.com, see your teacher in school, or check out quiz.outwood.com for those sweet revision quizzes. You can also follow the Outwood Humanities team on Twitter @OGATHumanities. Until next time, that was a little bit of history.